And yes, welcome to the second Sustinaires webinar of this fall. We've been talking about the society, the advancement of technology, and all the design and technical issues around building digital services sustainably for a better future. And there's more events coming by Sustinaires, which is a small organization at this point. We are organizing more webinars. We are organizing live events with our partners. So please stay tuned. We will publicize everything on our LinkedIn channel. And we also have a Slack channel where or Slack, where everybody's welcome to join and participate and have a discussion there. But if you follow us on LinkedIn, you won't miss any of the upcoming events, some of which are truly amazing. All right, that's enough of Sustinaires. Now it's to Michelle and Anna. Please.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Marco. And it's a pleasure to be here today. We'll be, just a second, we're sharing our presentation. Good. So yes, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks for the invitation, Marco and Sustinaires. And as you know, we'll be talking today about the missing layer and how to add inclusion, collective wisdom, and imagination to shaping these equitable futures. And my name is Michelle, Sahal Estimé. I'm a service designer. I have a passion for reducing inequalities. And together with Anna, about a year ago, almost a year ago, I think we have Empact has its first birthday next week. We founded Empact, which soon we'll tell you a little bit more about. But I'm working also as a service designer at Go4.
Hi, also from me. I'm Anna Pyyluoma. I'm also a service designer, and similarly to Michelle, I also kind of want to put my heart and soul into figuring out how to use design to make this world a better place. And I also work in these kind of different areas to do this. So through Empact, of course, and through working as a service designer at Go4.
Yeah, so today here's a little bit about what we'll be talking about today. First, we'll tell you a little bit about Empact. What's Empact about? What our mission and values in design, what we aim to do a little bit differently through Empact. We're going to be talking about the missing layer, and you'll hear about what do we exactly mean by the missing layer in design. Then we'll go to why it matters. Where do current design practices fall short? And then towards the end, how could it be included? So what type of practical strategies and tips do we have to weave inclusion into design, foresight, and facilitation? And at the end, we'll also share a little bit of a case study from something exciting we did last spring.
Cool. So a little bit about Empact. The way me and Michelle see this thing is that design shouldn't be just about fixing problems anymore. So design should be more about co-creating futures that are inclusive, equitable, and resilient. So we, through Empact, we target societal impact through this future-oriented work and inclusive design work. We mainly work with small-scale actors, as we see that among these smaller players, there is a big leverage to be used to make good things happen. So targeting societal impact and equitable futures through design, it's kind of big words. It might seem far from human-sized services. But in practice, we focus on aspects in human-centered design that also nourish inclusion and engagement. We emphasize diversity in user groups. We emphasize participation with this special focus on groups that are often overlooked. We also emphasize ways to activate empathy through deep understanding and also these empathy exercises. And we target impact that goes beyond the business impacts and impact that kind of recognizes possibilities in this positive societal and environmental impact or change.
And some of you may have noticed the name Empact actually is a combination of two words. Those two words Anna used a lot during the last slide. It was empathy and impact. So together they make Empact, which is what we're aiming for through our work. Good. Okay. So let's talk first a little bit quickly about customer centricity. What does it mean to actually put people at the core? So it means designing strategies, services, making decisions around the real needs and experiences that people have. So you put people at the core, and when you do that, it builds, of course, trust and loyalty. It can foster these types of long-lasting relationships where someone actually feels that they've been heard. This is actually meant for me. I'll keep going back. It creates mutual value. So again, the customers benefit and the organization that provides the services benefits also. It creates this type of, I guess, reinforcing cycle of value. Being customer centricity, of course, it means that you have to understand the customers truly. You have to really understand their needs, their customer journeys, what are their motivations, why do they even want to or need to use your services, and what challenges are you kind of helping them get over by using these challenges. So it helps customer centricity in itself. It helps organizations shift perspective from what do we offer to what do they need. And that's often I guess the missing link between, a good service and a not so good service. Do we do it for ourselves or do we do it to benefit the people who use it? So there's a lot of fields. We said new fields there on the slide, but it's not so new anymore. Customer centricity isn't a new thing. Of course, we have several fields that are growing around these notions. And for example, design, Anna and I were designers. So these are, I guess, the ones that we've been surrounded with for the longest. There's the different design approaches: service design, UX design, strategic design. All of these focus on understanding the user so that we can create experiences and services that are shaped around their needs. So then there's strategic foresight. Also similar, but it works kind of in the future. So it anticipates the changes and the future needs. And so it's also often used to guide this type of long-term customer-driven strategies and thinking on the long side. Then we have change management. It, of course, embeds all these approaches and the customer centricity into organizations. So it helps support the adoption of this and make those big cultural shifts that sometimes also can take a long time within organizations. And last but not least, definitely not least, because this to me is like the how to get to all of these things. So facilitation, it enables the collaboration and dialogue in all of the fields I just mentioned.
Cool. So good things in customer centricity, but there's always a but. We wanted to share a few examples of these thought models and practices that may look human-centered on the surface, but they still fall short in reality. It's surprising how common it is among design practices and other human-centered practices to maybe do it a bit superficially. So we have a few, we have a few examples here. The first one, we already know what the customer wants. It's a sentence that you quite often can hear from an organization. It's relying on assumptions instead of fresh insights about real people. It's a good example about this organization centered thinking rather than customer centered thinking. And the second one, imagining the customer instead of talking to them. This makes us susceptible to biases and assumptions. For example, you might create personas without actually talking to people, without like real engagement. So you work with stereotypes rather than the real understanding. And the third pitfall is focusing on the average user. So kind of figuring out that, okay, most of our users are this and that type of people. So then you kind of lose a lot of hidden potential in your customer base and ignore both diversity and these unique needs. And the fourth one, using generative AI to simulate the customer instead of engaging with real people. So this means you might replace real human interaction with these artificial proxies. It's also quite close to the previous point because generative AI is trained on this mass data instead of specific data about specific services or contexts. And the tokenistic participation, this is kind of my favorite pitfall, if you can say so. Tokenistic participation is kind of fake involvement where there is no actual influence over decision making. So you might facilitate these workshops, staff workshops, without the staff actually having a say in this decision making. So there isn't real influence in a workshop. So tokenistic participation also creates this kind of risk for any transformation and builds change resistance. And the last example is about asking feedback too late in the process. So then actually nothing can be changed in the design when the decisions have been made already. So all of these examples mentioned in the previous slides, they fall short on diversity and inclusion. It's not about honoring the wisdom of people in their diversity. So we want to do the honoring, but before we can kind of drive design, facilitation, foresight, or transformation, it's essential to kind of stop to ask the following questions. Who are we inviting in the process? How do we make sure that everyone feels good enough to participate? And how do we make sure that everyone can actually use the tools to participate or even have access to them? And how do we make sure that all the voices are actually heard, that they can have an influence? And do we acknowledge who isn't participating, who isn't in the room? If we are, what can we do to include these voices that are left behind? So these are kind of fundamental questions for any designer to make sure that inclusion is a true driver in the design process.
Good. We now have a question for you. Maybe some of the things that we just spoke about ring some bells. Do you have any ideas about what are some of, or any examples of this type of superficial customer centricity? Do you have any ideas where you could have noticed this happening? We have a Menti. There's a QR code on the slide. You can also go to Menti on menti.com and then put the code 32206896 there for you to answer the question. And this is something you can do while you're listening. So we'll see if we have time at the end to go through if anyone submitted anything. I think we have about 3 or 4 questions throughout the presentation.
Yeah. So please, if you participate, please keep open the Menti link so we can put the next question there.
Yeah.
But feel free to kind of ponder about this question if you have any pitfalls that you have experienced yourself.
Good. Okay, so we've been talking about the missing layer. So what is the missing layer exactly? Here we'll start by discussing what we see as the missing layer in design practice and leadership. It's in our opinion, it's diversity and inclusion that's missing throughout. So first, let's start a little bit by understanding what diversity means, or what we think about when we talk about diversity. Earlier this week, I think at the end of last week, actually, I read this column by Arthur C. Brooks stating that diversity of thought, experience, and ideology is really important, and not only the demographic diversity that we usually maybe focus on. So that would be a really good aim for any business to kind of go towards. So in line with that, we've with Anna collected some aspects that could maybe help us understand a little bit how people function, understand people in general, how do we differ from one another, and what are the things that determine how both we experience society, but also how society experiences us. So let's see. So what is diversity? Well, at least we'll put a few things here, at least age, language, legal gender, disability, name. These are maybe things that quickly pop up into people's minds when you think about what distinguishes us, how we differ from one another, what distinguishes us from each other. So these are more maybe of the demographic aspects that I mentioned before. But there's so much more. There's you see the purple circles that popped up. There's skin color, vision, gender identity, hearing, sexual orientation. There's more. There's culture, citizenship, neighborhood you live in, maybe, hearing, religion, and more. And now you see that these aspects that we have here on the screen now, they include much, much more than the demographic differences between us. Here you start getting the type of diversity of thought, experience, ideology, exactly those things that Brooks highlighted in the column recently about what's the most important thing to understand about people and humanity. So yes, there's even more. You see, these circles are all things that we need to be aware of, and things that we need to consider in life when we meet different people and interact. But there are also things that we need to think about when we design anything. Services is what me and Anna are doing. So, but each of these, of course, even here, there's a lot of circles, but these are still things that just me and Anna have kind of selected from our own perspective. It's good to recognize that someone else might have chosen very different circles to present here.
And here we have come to the next question. I hope you had a bit of time to reflect on the earlier question about some examples of superficial customer centricity, what it might look like. Now, the second question is about barriers. What prevents us from bringing inclusion into our processes? And what prevents us from co-creating these better futures these inclusive and equitable futures. So again, please, if you already closed the Menti link, please open it again. Here's the code and the QR code also. And I see that we're getting some answers already. Thank you, yay. So you can keep on ideating on these barriers as we go on.
Good. So this missing layer keeps coming up, right? So why do we think that the missing layer matters? Here in the next part, we'll discuss a little bit more about the importance of recognizing that there are these existing power structures and dynamics at play. And we need to recognize them and able to harness the power of what we call collective wisdom. So let's move forward to thinking about what all of this means.
Yes. So when we talk about inclusion, it's good to realize that it creates actual value. It's not just something like a nice idea. So for societies, there's of course this balance. Inclusion helps level the playing field. People can feel seen and heard, and they can have actorship in their own life. All this builds trust and makes it easier to work together. So communities become stronger and resilient for kind of adjusting to challenges ahead. But there's also this business perspective. Inclusion is also a practical positive to have. You can have diverse teams that bring fresh ideas and also are able to find new kind of solutions, better solutions, something outside the box. And companies can also read wider audiences and connect with more customers. And there's also the employee experience side. When employees feel that they actually belong, they're more motivated and want to kind of do their best and engage in the organization. So the value of inclusion is something that shows up everywhere around us. It builds these stronger communities and also healthier workplaces for us to engage in. Let's zoom in these business values. Equality in services pays off in many ways, but we have brought in maybe three different aspects. First, there's the trust issue. So when people feel that they are actually seen and supported in a service, their relationship with services becomes better. And second, it also widens the reach. So it's about the customer base. When services are accessible for everyone, when they serve everyone, you have a wider customer base to interact with. And the third one is about efficiency. So you can get to clearer and more inclusive services that solve actual problems and needs. And the people won't have as much need for repeating their visits or calling on the phone all the time to get their problems solved. So trust, reach, effectiveness, these are kind of quite clear business perspectives that we can think of, that there is a link from inclusion to business.
Exactly. And I think, well, many of us probably who are listening sometimes grapple with that, having to make the business case for inclusion or thinking about these types of it's kind of connecting the what feels like the right thing to do with the business value money. But there is that type of link, so it's good to always bring it forward in the difficult discussions, perhaps. Good. So yes, our world is biased. I don't think it's a surprise to any of us here. But our society, services, surroundings, everything is biased. And there are a lot of, I guess there's a lot of explanations behind this, but we've lifted here something that Caroline Criado Perez wrote a few years ago in her book, saying that everything around us is built from the white male perspective today. What she argues is that the world as we know it reflects the realities of this one dominant segment because the lack of disaggregated data. So basically, this whole skewed worldview, according to her, it goes through everything, all the way from ancient ancient Aristotle's writings to modern day services, where often the male experience is presented then as the universal one. And similar, as Anna earlier said, that there's an average user. So who is then the average user? It's probably again reflected back to what Criado Perez says about the everything being centered around this one male experience. So what we value then, because we live and we've grown up in this biased worldview, that means that what we value in terms of characteristics, knowledge, everything, it's also very narrowly defined. And this leads then to a very kind of homogeneous view of the world. So then you're thinking about how can we then take collective wisdom and imagination, and how can we let those things kind of lead us on a way towards somehow more inclusive and equitable futures if we're kind of in a box already, thinking narrowly. So these are things that we've been thinking about a lot with Anna, and we'll be telling you more about it soon. Good.
All right. This is pretty similar to what was just talked about in the Criado Perez writings. So there are also different ways of knowing, different kind of ways of forming knowledge. And those different ways of knowing are valued in different ways in society. And in this, I'm leaning towards Minna Salami's book, Sensuous Knowing. It was written in 2019, so also a few years back. And Minna links Euro-patriarchal knowledge systems to these power hierarchies. I'm gonna run you through this line of thought. So this pyramid that you can see now shows a kind of a rough picture on how power is distributed. You can see the male dominant or the white male dominant sector on the top of the pyramid, and the white men, of course, yield the most power. I think that's something that we can all agree on in this culture that we live in. So the one level below in this pyramid of power, you can find the men of color and white women. And then one level below them, there are women of color. And then again, one bottom below that level are animals and nature, which actually have no possibilities to rise in this pyramid of power and have a say in our society. So I assume that we can all kind of recognize something in our society in this description. But here's where it turns quite interesting. Minna Salami also describes this pyramid of knowledge, and that puts different ways of knowing in this similar hierarchical position. So this means that in Minna Salami's thinking, the pyramid of power reflects the pyramid of knowledge. So we have reason and rational thinking at the very top, a logical thinking, and these are all considered quite masculine ways of knowing. So you can kind of see that, okay, there's the rational white man on the top of the pyramid. So one level below are emotions and feelings, these things that are very crucial to this human experience, but often also a bit devalued, being illogical and hard to control. And one level below them, we have intuition and instinct, this subconscious thinking. And the lowest level, we have this general sense of existence and maybe some kind of embodied experiences. But all the lower levels of the pyramid, without a doubt, have effect on decision making. So all decision making, although it is being rationalized, it is not always based on this reason and rationality. So it kind of shows that these different ways of knowing are devalued and generally also considered as quite female traits, maybe. So the main message is that in order to challenge the status quo of who holds power in our society, we need to flip the pyramid of knowledge upside down. So we need to find ways to honor these different ways of knowing rather than reason and rationality. So we need to value our intuition and use it. And also we need to connect with these messages that our complex bodies give us. So we need to listen to more diverse ways of knowing beyond this logical thinking, reason, and rationality. So at Empact, we also want to take this one step further, not just valuing these different ways of knowing, but exploring the different ways of knowing together, allowing this collective wisdom being born from our kind of workings together, collective mind. So these bringing in these diverse perspectives, we need those. We need those to create something that is truly new and future oriented.
Yeah. So why do we think that this collective wisdom matters? Well, there's a quote there by Ken Blanchard saying that none of us is as smart as all of us. That's something that we truly believe in. And the collective wisdom, of course, then is the shared insight and knowledge and judgment that comes only when different types of people come together. So it's more than just the averaging of opinions. It's about combining all of our perspectives in a way, again, that creates this new understanding. And there's at the same time, you have to focus on the inclusive, on building the kind of environment and inclusion and safe space that allows the collective wisdom to arise. Because without it, there comes risks such as groupthink or things that kind of stifles or hinders the true collective wisdom to come up. But when you build the inclusion and the safe environments, the wisdom expands because all of this lived experience, cultural insights, alternative ways of knowing kind of enrich then what we then here call the collective or joint wisdom. So yeah, we've spoken a lot about collective wisdom now, but we also wanted to think about imagination. So there's wisdom in all of us, and collectively there's more of it. And we also want to think about the imagination. So the wisdom grounds us in the now, in the reality, whereas then the imagination explores and expands what is actually possible. And it asks the question of what could be. So we've talked about collective wisdom. Now we're talking also about collective imagination. So this means basically practicing imagination together, dreaming and enacting different types of possible futures together in a group that's diverse. And of course, today's world, it's a world full of alarming messages, worrying developments, and we need hope, but we also need the ability to together think about what and imagine these, like what could better futures look like for all of us. And here again, the diversity and multiple ways of thinking and knowing is the key. We have to stimulate the imagination and kind of cross pollinate different perspectives. And only then can we discover something that the type of one sided view that we perhaps are sometimes stuck in would never reveal or show. And there's also this type of, we need all kinds of different ways of doing this. We need the ability also, we need not only the ability to kind of imagine, but also the ability to play. We need the ability to engage in collective play and imagination to get over these types of stresses and challenges that we're going through in today's societies. And we need to create this type of hope and sense of belonging that then again brings us one step closer to building these types of inclusive and equitable futures. So we've been thinking about this quite a lot. How can we do this? And imagination, it seems like almost like a childlike thing that we all should have, but it's not always so easy to find it. Um, it could be, it seems easy to find maybe, but in fact, it can be very difficult to move beyond the kind of current realities and challenges that we're facing in everyday life. And that gives kind of rise to the need of good facilitation, for example. Facilitation, if you want to get past the current status quo, through facilitation, you have to focus on feeding the imagination. And there's a lot of different methods that you could use to stimulate the imagination. There's storytelling, different types of metaphors or dramatic arcs and narratives, visual imagery, visioning, dreaming, and even mindfulness exercises. Like these are all maybe things. I mean, maybe mindfulness doesn't seem like something that you would do in a workshop, but we've actually had some really good experiences doing that with Empact.
Yeah.
And having
And
it
also
built.
dreaming.
Dreaming, exactly.
Very powerful tool.
Yeah, extremely powerful. So these of course are things that maybe appeal more to the emotional level rather than the rational reasoning level. So I'm taking it back to what Anna just said about Minna Salami's pyramid of knowledge. Reason and rationality are maybe not the things that actually allow for the imagination to take flight. So perhaps we need to focus on the other steps. Good. So now back to Menti. We have the third question now. Maybe. Yes. So based on the previous question, in the last question you answered what's one barrier today that prevents us from co-creating inclusive futures. Now we want you to answer it. So what is one action that we could take to remove this barrier? Anything, everything. There's no silly answers or no bad answers. It would be nice to see what you have in mind. So what could we do? What is one action you could take to remove the barriers you thought of previously? Good. So moving on to, we've spoken about what and why, and now we're going to how. So how could this missing layer be included? We have, based on our learnings, we've created this own inclusive futures framework, which helps add the missing layer to already ongoing development work, already kind of design that we do on a daily basis, and to support in the creation of these future-proof, equitable services, spaces, and policies. So we argue with Anna that the way to shaping these more inclusive futures requires adding inclusion, requires adding collective wisdom and imagination to the mix of all of the current practices that we have. And this, of course, we do by making our existing work more inclusive through thinking about how do we facilitate, how do we design, and how do we think about the future. So starting with this inclusive facilitation, it's really only about changing the way conversations happen, right? It's not only about who's in the room, although that's a very major thing as well. But once you have the people in the room, you have to really work and make sure that all voices are actually heard. If you've ever facilitated a workshop, if you've ever facilitated anything, you know that there are always the people who are more maybe vocal, more free, feel more free to speak up. And then there's always the people who don't say much at all. So it's really a very important task for the facilitator to make sure that all of the voices are actually heard. There's a bunch of tools and practices that help surface these types of perspectives that probably otherwise might be missed. And of course, you have to always be mindful wherever you go, whatever group you have, there's always power dynamics at play within the group also. So it's really important to think about those as well. So again, we're not throwing out any traditional methods, but we're maybe evolving them to bring a little bit more balance. So then there's the inclusive design circle there. This is more about weaving real lived experiences, especially from the people who are usually left out of the process. So again, it's really important to bring different types of people to the process and recognize who's not there. It's not only about checking a box for diversity. It's also not, you don't need to bring people from all of those circles that I had in the previous slides earlier on, but it's about letting different experiences actively shape both the process, the design process, and the outcome. And when we do that, yes, the work becomes more grounded, more impactful, and honestly, more human. So finally, the last circle, inclusive foresight. This is about how we imagine the future. So often I think futures thinking is dominated by similar types of voices and assumptions. And the inclusive foresight brings again people to the table who are normally or usually excluded, especially from these underrepresented communities, to help shape these visions of what could be. And yes, this also leads to futures that are not only more creative and just, they're more fair, but also more resilient. So across basically all three circles, the thread or the main point is the same, centering diverse voices. It's not an add-on, but it should be a core part of how we work. Yeah, inclusive design, it's not a separate process. It goes through all of the design methods we already use in interviews, prototyping, testing. But again, yes, like I said, it asks, who are we missing? Who's not in the room right now? And how can we bring them in? And it's not about designing for people, but it's about designing with people more.
So about inclusive futures thinking, it's really about maybe justice, like who gets to imagine tomorrow's world. So when we come and we bring these foresight methods like scenario planning or speculative design to these, and we invite diverse groups in, the results are richer, but also it really reflects the diverse perspectives in a way that brings out the fairness. So including these voices that are often maybe overlooked challenges our own assumptions and fills in blind spots. And it helps us see these new kind of possibilities that are often would have been missed out on. So in practice, it could look like something like co-creating these scenarios with marginalized groups or communities, running backcasting workshops across generations, and also using storytelling to let kind of people voice out what kind of futures would be preferable for them, and using kind of their own words or wording. So inclusive futures thinking also strengthens participation and engagement, and the skills of the people, future skills of the people who we are kind of inviting in the process. So the more perspectives that we bring in, the more imaginative and resilient and equitable the outcomes will be. Inclusive facilitation, on the other hand, it doesn't mean that we are discarding every known method that we have used before. We can use those existing methods, and it's a good thing, but just tweak them so that we make sure that more voices are heard. So there are some simple techniques that you can see on the slide, like round robin sharing, that ensures that everyone speaks before anyone speaks the second time. Also silent brainstorming that allows more quiet voices to come and contribute without being overshadowed. And then there's, of course, these anonymous input, like digital tools, sort of like the Mentimeter that we're using today. You can use it anonymously, and it kind of helps balance these power dynamics. And also it can strengthen the feeling of safety that, okay, I'm feeling insecure about this thing, but I can voice it out here because I can do it anonymously.
Yeah. So here's to 5 concrete tips to keep in mind. This works for design, futures thinking, facilitation, everything. Just very, very concrete tips. So amplify the existing process. We really do think that the service design process at its finest, it's already inclusive. But you have to ensure that it's given sufficient time and resources to actually fully engage diverse perspectives. You have to be a little bit strategic about recruitment. You have to be very proactive, because if you're not proactive, you probably will end up with a similar group of people participating as you've always had before. So you have to pay attention and specifically seek out whoever you've recognized that isn't here normally. This could mean going into Facebook groups. This could mean doing things to recruit people that you maybe haven't done before. So then next we have meaningful participation. It's really important to ensure that when you do find someone to involve in your process, make it meaningful. Sometimes I've heard designers say maybe, oh, but I only heard this from one person. Okay, you only heard it from one person because you only had one person of that background in your interview pool, for example. But it is important that you still keep that insight, and you make sure that that insight makes a difference to what it is you're developing or designing. Otherwise, if you invited someone to participate, but you leave that insight out, obviously you're just wasting everyone's time. So then there's the barriers to participation. It might be hard for someone to come during the day. It might be hard for someone else to come during the evening. Sometimes someone might not be able to use a computer. It might be easier for you to go to them, meet at their home, meet at the office, whatever. Give different ways of participating. Offer different methods. Ask them, what would you prefer? And then, of course, build internal capacity. Look inwards. Who's in your team? Do we have anyone who represents some type of minority perspectives? If not, then how can we build those types of teams? Or then, if it's impossible to build those types of teams, how can we build the understanding of the people we have on the team? So these are very concrete tips for anyone to keep in mind for kind of building these types of more inclusive methods and ways of working. So we promised a quick little sneak peek into one of our recent cases last spring. We had this very, very exciting project together with the Association of Caribbean States. And what we did, we were in Trinidad and Tobago for a week, first moderating a high-level panel, and then having facilitating a strategic foresight workshop for the team. And the Greater Caribbean, it's a super interesting and often maybe a little bit dismissed region. It's a region that actually lives through a lot of the sustainability challenges that we speak about. It's not a potential disruption in the future, but it's actually here and now. The region is super diverse. There's everything from small island developing states to major global economies. And even with these large differences, everyone still sees the importance of regional collaboration and working together to create this type of sustainable, flourishing, and equitable region.
So we, two Finnish service designers, we traveled to Trinidad and Tobago to support this high-level political event for 4 days. Mm-hmm. And this was an event that kind of laid down the groundwork for the 5th day, where we had this strategic foresight workshop. So the 4 days, we got to hear a lot of these expert panel discussions and expert presentations, learning about different topics very relevant to the Greater Caribbean region. And we had also engaging in discussions around those topics. And we had forming these, not actually like scenarios, but more like how things could evolve in the future regarding these different themes and topics. So a lot of discussing and kind of buzzing thoughts in the first 4 days, and it all culminated in this foresight workshop where we got the ACS staff to work with us.
Yeah, it was a really interesting from the political standpoint to see who was in the room and who was not, and who wanted to speak out during the sessions and who didn't. And so we really paid attention with the team on focusing on the representation and insight of groups that traditionally might not be at the table. We had substance experts, at least on gender, Indigenous and youth matters, and then we had the local staff also in the room. This was really, really, really interesting. And there was a lot of people who weren't maybe used to being in these types of situations. So we had to really make an effort to make sure that everyone, again, felt included.
Yeah, because of that, because all the people weren't maybe used to either these types of events or just in co-creation in general, we kind of wanted to bring in different types of methods to participate to make it as easy as possible for everyone. So you could participate with your name and your face, but also you could participate anonymously. So we had different digital methods of participation. We used the same Mentimeter that we have used today, but also like chat and different methods, group work, also these open facilitated discussions. It was a lot about kind of reading the room and sensing what is happening, what are the dynamics, and how can we facilitate it forward.
Yeah, I see we have 1 minute left
Oh.
until so we didn't end up having time for going through all the Menti answers, but we do want to say a big thank you for participating and writing your comments and insights in Menti, and we'll definitely take a look
Yes.
and see. Perhaps, I mean, maybe you have some great ideas that we haven't thought of ourselves yet, and
Most probably.
Sure.
And we'll probably close our recording soon, but if you still have some questions that you want to give us, then we will be happy to answer everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.